Hi everybody, my name is Cedar and I am the illustrator of the book A Search for the Northern Lights by Elizabeth Rusch and Izzi Rusch. I have been an artist my whole life. I am definitely a nerd. I say this as a positive thing. I would call myself an art nerd. When I was a kid, I was just as much of a mega nerd as I am now. My favorite thing was going to the library, and I read as many books as I could. I was a little bit shy and quiet, and I climbed trees a lot with my brothers. And of course, I loved doing art. Here's a couple paintings I made as a child. That horse I made when I was around 9 years old, and the lion when I was around 13 years old. And an interesting fact about me is that I sold my first painting when I was 12 years old. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that painting that I sold. It was a painting of a woman picking tomatoes in a field with a baby on her back. And she was putting the tomatoes in a basket. And I really wish that I had taken a picture of it, but I didn't. And I sold that painting to a teacher for I think $40, and it was very exciting for me. People ask sometimes if my parents are artists too, and they aren't really, but they are both very creative people. You can see here, that's my dad, and he made this mailbox. My dad has always been into mushrooms, and he thought it would be cool to have a mailbox that was a mushroom, so he decided to make one. That mushroom is called an Amanita muscaria, and it's actually very poisonous. So don't ever eat a mushroom if it looks like that. And my mom, she knows how to sew, and she has made a lot of quilts. And the whole time I was growing up, she was always working on sewing quilts. So my parents taught me to do things with your hands, and if you want something, to try and make it yourself. And I think that's something that's important for all artists to have. So I was serious about painting even as a teenager, and I went through a phase. These two paintings I made when I was about 18 to 20 years old. At the time I called these square paintings. This was just a brief phase, but it was my style at the time. And since then I have painted many portraits of both people and animals. I've painted many flowers. I've painted many scenes from outer space, mostly from my imagination. And I've painted lots and lots of trees. I've made about 600 paintings so far. This is what my more recent paintings look like right now. My paintings of the forest I call the Looking Up series, and I've been working on this series of paintings for the past 15 years. If you Google Art by Cedar, you'll find me. My website is artbycedar.com. I'm on YouTube if you search for Cedar Lee. I'm on Facebook, just search for Art by Cedar, and I'm Art by Cedar on Instagram. A couple more things about me. I love my dog and I love gardening. This is my dog. His name is Blake. He is a black lab, and as of right now, he's 11 and a half years old, so he's getting pretty old, but he's still pretty healthy, and he's the sweetest dog ever. And on the right there, you'll see a sunflower from my garden from a couple years ago. This is not photoshopped. This is a real sunflower that I grew that was 15 feet tall, no joke, and I call it the mutant sunflower, and it was a pretty incredible garden that summer. Okay, so that's enough about me. Let me tell you the story of this book that I illustrated. So, does anyone remember the solar eclipse from 2017? Well, I made a series of solar eclipse paintings for an art show that year. I had to make all of these paintings, enough for an entire art show, and I ended up shipping them across the country from my home in Oregon to an art center in Kentucky for this show that aligned with the date of the eclipse. So Elizabeth Rusch is an award-winning children's book author, and she and her teenager Izzi were writing a book about the Northern Lights. or the aurora borealis. Izzi was searching for artists and found my eclipse paintings online. And they thought that I would be a good artist to illustrate their book. So they sent me an email and asked if I might be interested, and I said sure, but first the publisher would have to hire me, and the publisher was considering other artists too. So many months passed by, and then the publisher, West Margin Press, finally contacted me and offered me the job, and I agreed to do it. So this is the process of illustrating a book. First, they send me the text of the book that the authors already wrote so that I could come up with ideas for each page. And then after I came up with my ideas, I had to submit this work over 3 phases. The first phase is the thumbnails, which is just a very rough drawing of my ideas for each page to show them what I was thinking. Then they have to approve those thumbnails. Then I move on to the sketches, which is the approved thumbnails, but finished drawings in much more detail. Then there's some back and forth with that phase, and finally the sketches are approved. Once the sketches are approved, then I work on the final art, which is all of the paintings for the book in full color, exactly how they will be in the book. So they put a lot of time into those first 2 phases, the thumbnails and sketches, to make sure that we get every detail right. So hopefully by the time you do the final art, there aren't many revisions that you need to do at the end. So at first I thought that the main character, Alex, was supposed to be about 13 years old. But then the authors told me that they had pictured her more as an 8-year-old. And so now I needed an 8-year-old and her mom to be my models. And I thought, hey, my daughter is almost 8 and I'm her mom. I had found my models. Anytime I needed one of us to model for a scene in the book, I just ran and took a picture. It was very convenient. Sometimes we would be wearing our pajamas, or our hair would be all messed up, or we would be in the middle of doing something and there would be a mess in the background in the photo, but none of that mattered because all I needed was to be able to look at our faces and the pose of the body and the facial expressions and things like that. And then I could change all of the details to fit with the story. Like I would change the clothes and the hair and the background. So now I'm going to show you a few examples of a few spreads from the book from the very beginning phase until the very end. And you can see how many times we had to go back and forth, and I had to do this over and over and over until I got it just right. So in this first example, this is the thumbnail that I submitted to them. Okay, so in this scene of the book, Alex and her mom get on a plane and they fly to Alaska in the hopes of seeing the northern lights. And when they get to Alaska, it's raining and the skies are gray and they can't see any northern lights, so they're a little disappointed. So that's what I'm trying to show here. And you can see that I have the 13-year-old Alex here in this first draft. So they asked me to change, they liked the layout of this and the ideas here, but they wanted me to make Alex be 8 years old. So I made Alex be 8 years old. Here, at this point, I've decided to use myself and my daughter as the models. And I changed that, and then that thumbnail got approved. So I moved on to sketches, and you can see the sketch is the same thing, but in full detail. And then at this point, I did have to make a couple tiny revisions to this one, but it was just little tweaks, like very small details of their faces and stuff like that. So here's the finished revised sketch, which they did approve. And at this point, now all I have to do is create this image, but in full color. So here's the final art that I submitted to them after I painted it in full color. And then here is the final spread in the book after the graphic designer has added the text to my artwork. Okay, here's another one. So one idea I initially had for the book was that when the mom was explaining what auroras are to Alex, or when Alex was imagining the auroras, to actually show images of what they were imagining. So the aurora would be in the background while they were talking. So this is what I initially sent to them. And I ended up removing all of that imaginary stuff in the background and making it more of an indoor scene. So this was the revision of that thumbnail that I sent to them. And then they finally approved that. And then so here is the sketch, which is done in a lot of detail. And you can imagine that each one of these drawings takes a while to do all these details. So this sketch, I actually had to completely redo part of it because for one thing, the angles are wonky on that laptop, and the angle of Alex's body in this picture is kind of strange. And they also wanted her expression, instead of smiling, they wanted her to look more sad and wistful because she is dreaming of seeing the Northern Lights and wondering if she'll ever get to. So I completely redid Alex, and here's the revised sketch of that one. And they approved that one, and then I went on to do the final art. And then here is after the graphic designer added the words to my art in the final book. Okay, one last example. So in this one, Alex and her mom go out into a field in the country, and they're hoping to see the Northern Lights up in the sky. And they think they might see an orange glow at the horizon, so they're pointing, "What's that?" So this is the idea I sent them. And the basic idea was good, but they said, what if we have the mom sitting down so that Alex is taking more of a center stage because she is the main character? So then I came up with this, and this was approved. Then I did the sketch in detail. And the problem with this first sketch that I sent them was that Alex looks way too small here because the photo I was looking at that I took of my daughter, I took the photo sort of from above her. And because they're standing up on a hill, I should have taken the photo from below so that she looks like an 8-year-old instead of a younger kid. So I ended up redoing this one to get the proportions right. So now Alex looks like an 8-year-old. And then this one got approved. And then here's the final art. And here it is with the words. So you can see there's quite a process involved with each and every picture in the book. And besides doing all of these revisions, this project was also a lot of work because I was making these paintings very large. I made them large scale because I wanted to include a lot of details in each one. The book is 10 inches by 10 inches, or if it's fully opened, 10 inches by 20 inches. But my original paintings are almost 20 inches by 40 inches, which is pretty big. So the thing that I would most want to tell kids about illustrating a book is that illustrating is hard. There were a lot of things that I spent many hours on before I sent them to my editor, Michelle, that never made it into the book. Michelle and the people at West Margin Press said, "Nope, this is no good, do the whole thing over." But of course they said it politely. So I would do the whole thing over again and again and again. So I mentioned my original idea of showing these imaginary auroras that aren't really there, but they're talking about it. So they're like conjuring up an image of it. And the editor said to remove all of these imaginary auroras for two reasons. One, younger kids might take it too literally, like, is the mom really making an actual aurora in the forest with her hand? And two, they wanted to save the best for the last. They wanted me to create a buildup of anticipation where we feel excited to see auroras and then we finally get to see them at the end of the book. So I was kind of sad to scrap that idea, but it does make sense. And I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did. And I think the book is really strong. So here's one idea that I sent them with that imaginary aurora where they're walking in the forest. And then I ended up doing this instead, walking in the forest, but without any imaginary aurora shown. Here's another one that I had to redo. Instead of showing what was in Alex's mind, in this spread, the imaginary aurora ring around the North Pole and the new moon, indicating that the sky would be dark and you'd be able to see an aurora. She's imagining all these science facts, right? And instead of that, I ended up showing her living room instead. And that was great. They loved it. But then they didn't like the layout of the room. So I had to do that part all over again. And at this point, I started just cutting up my drawings, and I taped the part that they liked into my new drawing. All of this was very hard. I spent a lot of late nights working in the studio, but it was all worth it. My editor and the publisher weren't being mean when they made me redo things. They were helping me make my art better. Every revision that I did, the book came together a little bit more. Making a book is a team project. Everybody contributes their own strengths and puts their heads together, and everybody tries their hardest to make the book awesome. When I finally sent them all of my final art, I felt very proud of myself. Here's what I want you to know. Art is hard. It's hard for everyone, even for professional artists. No matter how good at art you get, it will never really feel easy. When you see someone who's good at art, it's because they practiced and practiced and then practiced some more. So if you want to do art and you think it's hard, remember that you can do hard things. If you feel like you can't do it anyway. Your work will not be good at first. This is normal. Nobody's work is good at first. But keep working and don't ever quit. So, besides using my own family for models, where else did I get ideas from? Well, I used things from my home and my real life, like my son's stuffed animals, Staluna and Fluffy Duck. He is now 10 years old and he has had Fluffy Duck since he was 2 years old. And the actual phone that my kids use to play games. Put some of my real house plants into the book. Some of my artwork shows up. Then I also used some photos that the authors sent me from their travels. That's Izzy there on the left wearing eclipse glasses while watching the eclipse in 2017. And I used that inspiring location to sort of get a feel for how I wanted my illustration to look. There's Izzy with a reindeer in Alaska. And then on the right, I put Alex with the same reindeer. And this is a dog sled that Liz and Izzy went on in Alaska. You can see that I flipped the image in the book to fit the text better on this page. And I used Google Images a lot. I have not yet seen an aurora in real life, so I watched videos of auroras and I looked at tons of pictures online, and I looked at books as well to get ideas of how to paint the northern lights. It took me 6 months to finish all the art. I shipped all the finished art to the publisher so that they could get high-res scans made. Then the publisher's graphic designer, Rachel, did a great job adding Liz and Izzy's words to my paintings. And finally, the book was finished and got sent to the printer. If you would like to buy a copy of this book, you can get a copy signed by me through my website. Just go to artbycedar.com and click on books, and you can order one from there. It's also available from Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Just look up the title, A Search for the Northern Lights. When I first signed the contract to illustrate this book, I told my editor that it was my first time and I had no idea what I was doing. And she told me that a good illustrator takes the story given to them by the author, and instead of just illustrating the words, they also add something more to it that makes it their own. So the finished book is greater than the sum of its parts. I learned a lot from creating these illustrations, and I really love how beautiful the book turned out. Hopefully this little peek behind the scenes has been interesting to both kids and adults. Thank you all for watching. Bye.